back, everyone. This is Banterweight, and I'm Zach, and with me is Braden and Holden. After an exciting 2 weeks of fights, we've decided to go into a bit of a recap of the events, which were just going to be UFC 259 and then the Bilal Muhammad and Leon Edwards fight night. This episode is going to be like a two-part series of where we go into depth of the events today, and then next time we're just going to look at the controversies and our opinions of certain rules that we've seen over the past couple of weeks. So today we're just going to start off talking with the UFC 259 card, which had the 3 championship fights. In my opinion, from the early prelims all the way to the main card, it was pretty enjoyable. And in my opinion, some of the best fights were on the prelims. So were there any fights that caught your guys' eye on the prelims that you wanted to mention?
There were a few fights that I thought a couple prospects showed really big in. I thought Brady's win over Matthews was huge. He kind of dominated that entire fight. And for him to finish it with the arm triangle, it was quite nice of him. It was a quite nice finish, and it's quite nice for that division. I think he's going to be a real force in that division. He's still undefeated too, isn't he?
I do believe so, yeah.
Yeah. I know the Alberg. I don't even want to try his last name, so I'll say Kennedy. The Carlos Alberg versus Kennedy fight was a war, but I know a lot of people are really hyping that up. I saw like guys just throwing with their hands at their waists, so that really was just more of two tough guys going at it, which is cool to watch. But I'd like to see more from both those guys. And then the last fight, that was big for me. Other than Kai Kara France, because obviously I think Kai Kara France was just a dominant force. I think that's a huge guy for city kickboxing coming through, especially after that finish. Dominic Cruz and Casey Kenny fought a very close fight. And I know we've talked about it before, but Dominic Cruz didn't look the way that he usually looks, but he definitely did look. He did look good in that fight. I thought he looked. He looked like he was still good. He's not prime Cruz, but he was still moving quite well. He was figuring out Casey Kenny well, and Casey Kenny's a decently hard guy to figure out, and he really went toe to toe with Cruz in a lot of those exchanges, really forcing his game plan in there. So I thought that was a really good fight, a really close fight.
Yeah, I'll have to agree with your Kai Kara France fight as well. I found it a pretty crazy fight just because even though it was the one round, I think Kara France was losing that fight bad up until literally the last like 10 seconds of the fight where he got the walk-off knockout. So I think that's huge finish for him. What do you think, Bryn?
I was really into that Cruz fight as well. And I think you're right that it's not the same Cruz that we saw in past years. I think it makes you kind of look back at that Cody Garbrandt fight too, right? Because that was the first time we saw Cruz kind of have that more exchanging, kind of like lean on his toughness style a little bit more. And a lot of that was chalked up to the fact that he was a little bit more desperate because of the cut in the early rounds, and then that Garbrandt was just so good on the feet. But I think maybe we are seeing a little bit of a shift in Dom's game. Maybe as he gets older, he can't really rely on that bouncing up and down, working that footwork as much as he used to. Because I think in this fight we saw him very much. He was a lot more ready to exchange, I guess, and he wasn't kind of floating in and out like he would have in earlier years. But I think you're right. I think he did look good. He just didn't look the same.
Yeah. Some performances from like Song Yadong and the Phillips fight was also really good in my opinion.
I thought Song Yadong won that fight, to be honest.
Yeah, it was hit or miss, but I think I was leaning more towards Yadong as well. And then obviously the Askarov versus Benavidez fight happened on the prelims as well, which was kind of tough to see Benavidez lose so badly. But I mean, Askarov, you can't put any shame on him. He's pretty good as well. But from that, go ahead.
Another great flyweight fight on that card was not a great fight, I would say, but a dominant performance was Tim Elliott. He went out there and he choice words aside that the fighters were saying to each other, he came out there looking like a Tim Elliott that I don't think we've seen in recent memory. and I was pretty excited about that. And Joseph Benavidez with that last loss, I'd like to see Tim Elliott fight Joseph Benavidez. I think that'd be a really good fight coming up next.
Yeah. So moving from the prelims, just prior to the championship fights, there was the Islam Makhachev versus Drew Dober fight. I know we've kind of briefly touched on it outside of the podcast, but where do you guys think Islam Makhachev is headed to next?
Do you give him a
I
top
think
5 opponent? Maybe. I don't know, because the problem is Drew Dober isn't the kind of name that should catapult you necessarily into the top 5. But
he
if I'm
is
looking
the
at
only
it,
guy that would fight him.
Yeah,
that's true.
And I think Dober was 15, or he was ranked. I know that. I just don't remember.
Yeah.
Maybe a 10. I'm not sure. But
It's just I feel like looking at Islam as someone who, knows the martial arts relatively well. I think looking at his skill set and what he's been able to do and just how he moves, how he works, he could be one of the best guys in the world. But beating someone like Drew Dober doesn't necessarily justify jumping that high up. So maybe like I don't know who's ranked, like maybe like a 7, 8, not or 7, 8, maybe 6.
There's a couple guys there. There's Felder that's there. There's Hooker. There's McGregor, but McGregor's got his fight with Dustin Poirier coming up, his trilogy fight there. And there's RDA. So there's 3 guys that are really tough guys there, really big names in the UFC there that I think Islam, like Braden said, needs to do before he can get a top 5 opponent.
Yeah, so I'm just taking a look at the rankings now. Islam Makhachev is ranked 11 now. And then like RDA and Hooker are both 7 and 8 respectively. So, I mean, you could make that.
What's Felder at, Zach?
10.
Okay, yeah.
But I mean, I could see the RDA and Makhachev because they did have that fight lined up before RDA took on Felder, so they could kind of rekindle that fight there.
I do think if they did push Islam up into those higher ranks, he would be able to hang with those top guys. But yeah, it doesn't make sense ranking wise for him to jump that much. But there's another guy. Oh well, I guess Tony's now slated to fight
Beneil.
Beneil.
Yeah.
So maybe depending on how that fight goes, we could see one of them potentially end up fighting.
See, it's difficult too because when you look at the rankings, number 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and then 9, they all have fights. So it's very slim pickings for who you actually want to fight, unless you wait, right? But I mean, I'm not sure how much time Makhachev needs because he didn't really take any damage whatsoever. But I mean, I think the RDA ones sounded pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah, it was scheduled before. There's already kind of a little bit of history there.
Yeah. All right, so we'll move into the first title fight of the card. We're not going to go fully into depth of it because it's definitely a centerpiece in the next video of this 2-part series. But just speaking
about... I did have one little quick thing I wanted to say about the Islam thing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I feel like this year, and maybe even the past few months especially, it has been the year of people stepping into fights and being able to like jump those guys. You know what I mean? Like we just saw it with Bilal. Like there's been a bunch of them. And I think Islam could potentially end up being one of those guys that could jump into a spot because he has that skill set and the people are interested in seeing him at that level, even though he hasn't walked the stairs of the ranks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those lightweight fights coming out soon or going on soon too. So, with COVID and all these injuries and everything like that, there's a chance that he could step into a spot like Muhammad did, right? So that's a possibility too. Yeah. All right. So now we'll move on to the first fight or the first title fight. Like I was saying, it's going to be a huge part of our next video. So we're not going to really go into the whole knee situation on this video, but more or less just wanted to hear you guys' opinions on the actual performances of each of the fighters. I'll let Brady go first for this one.
I think they both look good. I think the way it was heading, we were seeing Sterling fade, and that was, it's hard to speculate, right? But that seems like where the fight was going to go. I don't think that it didn't look like it was going to get better for him had that knee not happened. But starting out, I think both guys did look very impressive.
How about you, Holden?
Yeah, I would agree with Braden. I think Petr Yan was winning that fight. In the first round, I think I think Yan came out. Sterling needed to, or at least in his game plan, it was to end that fight early because I don't think he can keep the pace that he usually sets over 5 rounds. And Yan has done 5 round fights with the best of the best, like Jose Aldo. So I think that's one of those things that Sterling wasn't ready for the level of physicality that really goes into a 5 round fight. I think he came out pretty hot on the guns and he was throwing a lot of strikes. And a lot of strikes missed Yan, and Yan was able to knock him down. And then he couldn't take Yan down, which was really his defense mechanism, kind of like, hey, I know I have this in the bag. But he didn't. Yan scored 11 of 12 takedowns. Defended 11 of 12 takedowns, which is huge. And Yan was tripping him up. I think he got 7 takedowns of his own.
You got a few, yeah.
Yeah, but
And they were
he was
nice.
getting. They were nice. They were beautiful trips. He was
Yeah.
catching kicks and tripping him. He was literally just there was one time where he just came in, and I'm pretty sure he just got in a Sotogari, just like literally coming in and advancing on. Yeah, you would like that, Juno. But yeah, like Yan just looked like another beast in that fight, and it's a shame about the knee because he definitely looked on a path to kind of have a really great win on his record.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are gonna redo that fight too. Hopefully, I mean, if they don't, it's just silly. But I honestly, my own opinion, I don't think that the second fight will go any different, other than the knee, hopefully. But I think Jan is gonna get the belt back pretty soon.
I do think that Sterling, even though he looked sharp and he looked ready, and I think he did want to push that pace at the beginning, so I assume that he was well trained to push that pace. I do think he looked a little bit less comfortable than we've seen him in previous fights. I don't know if that was kind of the nerves of the moment catching him early on, but there were times where maybe he didn't set up takedowns as well as we would expect from him. And I think that that's partially just because Jan is that good, but I think also Sterling he didn't look as smooth as the Sterling we saw against Sandhagen or against Munoz.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jan's underrated in that regard. Jan going into that fight, I think, was actually fairly underrated. But I think Sterling put, and a lot of people would have, even me going into that fight, put a lot more respect into Sterling's striking game than I guess, not that more so than he deserved, but more so than he deserved against Jan, because you just saw Jan was moving and he wasn't allowing Sterling to gain momentum, to get these combinations and gain momentum. He would always, he'd always break on his terms and miss strikes on his terms. And there's a couple just massive misses in that fight that Sterling would throw a wild left hook and Jan would just calmly go under it. He wasn't allowing Sterling to catch momentum. So I thought Sterling came out looking strong, but I don't think it was kind of the lights of the moment. I think it was Jan is that good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it'd be pretty interesting, hopefully, to see that back before the year's over. I'm assuming we will, but you never know, right? But moving on to the second title fight of the night, of course, Amanda Nunes took on Megan Anderson, and of course, she defeated her.
What is there even to say about this fight, man?
Yeah, I mean,
fight of the year candidate.
See, unlike my prediction of a few videos back, she didn't retire. My whole predictions for the champs of 2021 are just going downhill, so we'll pretend that video ever happened. But I mean, I know Juliana Pena has been calling Nunes out. I'm not really sure why. I don't really agree with it. But what do you guys think about
that? For me, it's kind of a who else situation in that division right now. Juliana Pena, they have had fights that they've been in the talkings that haven't gone through before. That's knowledge. So it's not like there isn't at least some history to this fight. But at the end of the day, I think realistically, and that's me trying to sell it, being optimistic and trying to sell it. But really, at the end of the day, I think it comes to who else in that female bantamweight division is even in a position to fight Nunes at this point.
Yeah.
Like Pena Penya's the only one there, and with such a dominant performance over Megan Anderson, like I don't think it's gonna go any differently.
No, probably not. I mean, realistically, the only thing I can see that would give her any type of competition at this point is that super fight with Shevchenko for the third time. But then
I'd
again,
like to see that.
I'm not sure if that would happen either because I know Shevchenko does have that Andrade fight lined up for I think UFC 261 or something like that. But
Hmm. I mean, if
Mhm.
she gets through Andrade, then that's also kind
Yeah,
of the fight to make for her, right? Because who's after Andrade?
Well,
that's the honor.
the realistic thing is who, like when you think about Shevchenko and Nunes, like who can beat Shevchenko but Nunes, and who poses a threat to Nunes but Shevchenko.
Yeah,
So I think Andrade is good, but she brings nothing to the table that I can't see Shevchenko thwarting, other than her power. But Shevchenko is just she can outclass her technically
yeah,
very easily.
Yeah, and also Shevchenko, we've seen Andrade fight technical people and beat them just through a combination of just like her own. She does have technical skill, like a lot of technical skill, but then also the fact that she's so physically overwhelming to a lot of the other females in the division, right? But that's not necessarily going to be the case with Shevchenko. Shevchenko is hard, like she is strong. When you see her in those clinch positions, those grappling positions, like she isn't someone who gets overpowered or overwhelmed when it does come to that. And then she has so much more superior skill over everyone else that we don't even know if it ends up going to those like physically taxing. Although her last fight with Maya, we did see her go through
yeah, yeah.
um, a little bit
Adversity.
of trouble there.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I agree. I think
Yeah,
Shevchenko is.
before knocking Maya out cold.
Did she
Was
knock
it?
out Maya cold?
I think it was a decision, to be honest.
I think it was two.
I didn't think it was a decision. I might be wrong on that, but I
Let
was
me let me
It
double
was a
check.
little while ago.
But yeah. While I'm looking this up, actually I have it
yeah,
here.
it's a
So
decision. Yeah,
is it a
Mhm.
decision?
I don't know who I was thinking of then. That was weird. But
Chukagian maybe.
That was decision too, I think.
oh, Jesus. There was a knockout from Shevchenko I watched recently, but
Oh no, it might have been Chikagian. It was actually a
oh, okay. So it was
TKO. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's my bad. Sorry about that.
It's all
No
good.
worries. There's a
Um,
lot of fights to watch. They get jumbled up in your head, right?
yeah. So we'll just move on to the final fight of the UFC 259 card.
Hmm.
Champ versus Champ, Blachowicz versus Adesanya. I'll just let you guys break that one down. So whoever wants to go first.
Um, I know I don't agree with the 10-8 rounds. I really don't agree with the 10-8 rounds that were given for the fifth round. I thought it was clearly a Blachowicz round, but to give it 10-8, so that was something I didn't like. Um, I had Blachowicz winning the fight. I think he fought a good fight. It was a close fight. But I think he played it well. He didn't rush in, kind of like a lot of people expected him to. And Izzy has even said that he expected him to. He was waiting for those power shots, and Jan played the fight well, and then used his wrestling really well at the end. I know Khabib came up to him after and said, good wrestling is power, and like all
Yeah,
that. And when that was a close fight that could have gone either way, and wrestling really did win that fight for Jan at the end of the day. So yeah, I thought it was a close fight. I wouldn't say it was a great fight, but I thought it was a close fight.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know if it could have gone either way. I think it was by the end it was pretty clearly Blachowicz. I think going into the fourth round it maybe could have gone either way. Um, I'd like to rewatch it again without the commentary because that's kind of been the
Yeah,
story lately, right? But
Yeah.
definitely.
in the moment when I was watching it and I was listening to the commentary while I was watching it, I did have Izzy up, I think, rounds 1 and 3, I think, and I think Blachowicz had round 2, and from what I was watching. But you could tell it was definitely like however you weighed the strikes because you can tell when Izzy um, hit Jan, he kind of bounced his head back, especially with those jabs. But when Jan hit Izzy, you could see Izzy's whole body was kind of knocked back, right? Like you could see the difference in power. Um, And it'd be interesting to watch again because I think I was watching those feints as well, and I think they were there. But I think Michael Bisping made this point in his podcast too. Like you have to do something with those feints. Izzy was drawing reactions out of Jan, but he never really capitalized on those reactions.
Yeah, I think the whole commentary thing was very biased towards Izzy, and like you, I obviously was watching it with the commentary on, and it definitely kind of swayed opinions. But then, kind of looking over it afterwards, I don't necessarily agree with what they were so biased about for Izzy. Um, but I mean, hopefully that's not going to be always the case in commentary nowadays. But I mean, we don't know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens every once in a while though.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like part of the reason they were so biased was they kept mentioning those the feints. They were saying that Blachowicz was biting on those feints, like biting a lot, right? Because whenever Izzy did feint, you saw Blachowicz kind of like move his head or like move his hands, right? Um, but Izzy never like once he got those reactions out of Jan, like he never switched it up to kind of take advantage of him like putting other openings out, right? So because he never actually did anything with the feints that the commentators just kept talking and talking about didn't actually end up mattering in terms of the fight as much as one would believe, hearing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought like just to kind of clarify on what I said earlier, I thought each round was close. I wasn't watching the rounds and going, from the beginning, oh my gosh, this is Jan's round or whatever. At the end, I scored the fight 4-1 for Jan, but each round I thought individually was close up until a certain moment where it kind of where I was just like, okay, Jan's looking like he's landing a bit cleaner and he was checking those leg kicks. I thought he was better defensively, but I found that both guys were trying to measure each other up, and a big part of that measuring was those feints because I think Jan was expecting more attacks off those feints than were actually coming off those feints.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting fight. In my opinion, I do think Adesanya will eventually be back. But I know he mentioned that he's going to just kind of stay around with the middleweights, kind of defend his belt a few more times, which I think is a good idea. Um, but yeah, I mean, from that we'll move on to the Edwards Muhammad fight night. Originally was super excited for this card just because there's a lot of Canadians on there. Unfortunately, it didn't end very well for a lot of them except Jourdain. Um, but I mean, if you wanted to talk about the Jourdain fight, Holden, I know you're a fan of that fight, so
Yeah, I was a really big fan of that fight. I don't know how you guys saw that fight, or
I didn't catch it to be honest.
fair enough.
Yeah, yeah.
For me it was a very it's one of those candidates. I think it could be a candidate for fight of the year. I don't think it's going to be a winner. But I think it's a candidate for fight of the year because it was back and forth. It was a very close fight. Going into the third round, um, I had it 1-1, and Charles Jourdain's corner was going into the third round. They're like, you need to finish this fight. You need to finish this fight. Um, and he came out in that third round and just looked incredible. I've this is a guy I've been following since his days in TKO. I've been watching his fights when he was featherweight champion TKO, and he's such a dynamic striker. Braden would love him because he mixes up creativity so well. His creativity is so good, and he uses flying attacks actually very smart. He doesn't just rush guys with a flying knee like Masvidal. Even though that was the right thing for that
Hey man,
situation.
that it worked. It worked.
Yeah, well,
Man, it's
I'm
hard,
not.
hard to bash that.
No, I wasn't I'm not bashing that. I'm saying that there's guys that rush in, and that was an example. I think it worked well in the Masvidal situation, but there's also guys that are just that when they think about a flying attack, they think about desperation and just rushing the other guy. And this is a guy that will range people and just be staying at range and throw a flying crane kick or whatever, right? So he switches up his aerial attacks really well, which gives him the nickname Air. And he did really, really well in that fight to kind of bounce back from what his corner thinks he lost the first two rounds. I think it was a very close first two rounds. And that last round, he looked dominant. So I'm really excited for him as a prospect in that division.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll just move on to the Edwards and Muhammad fight. Very unfortunate end to that fight. of course, we all know that it did end due to an eye poke from Edwards. Like I said, for the yawn and Sterling knee, we're gonna kind of go over that in the next video. So we'll just kind of talk about the performances then of each fighter up until the incident there. So Brain,
Um,
yeah.
what the really tricky part about this fight, and then also an earlier fight in the night, the Eric Anders fight that also ended with an illegal
I
knee,
forgot about that one. Yeah.
is the guys who were losing the fight based on conventional wisdom before the fight should have been the guys who came on stronger near the end, right? Like Leon Edwards, in my opinion, is probably he's better technically than Bilal, right?
Mhm.
And there's a reason that he's number 3 and Bilal is much further down the rankings right now. But Bilal is known to be one of those guys who fights through the fire in the later rounds. And Leon has been out for a long time. So going into the fight, one of the things that I was wondering was, okay, Leon might be technically superior, but how does he react when things get difficult later on? Because Bilal's been there. He fought like a month ago, right? And then same with the Eric Anders fight. Eric Anders is known for starting very strong, but he's occasionally faded near the end. The sad thing is that when these illegal moves happen that finish the fight, we don't get to see those guys who should have had more of a chance later on.
Mhm.
I think Leon did look better from what we saw in that fight for sure. I don't think Bilal looked bad. I think Bilal did look pretty good. Um, the thing I'm disappointed though is that we didn't get to see the better part of his style, I think.
Yeah. Any thoughts,
Yeah,
Holden?
I I'd agree with that. I think I think Edwards looked like he was on path to winning that fight. Um, and a bit more with the Eric Anders situation where with the knee instead of an eye poke, with gloves and all that, and something we'll get way more into in the next podcast. But Leon Edwards, it's unfortunate because he was looking really good. So I agree with everything Braden said. The only thing I don't agree with is what Leon Edwards said himself about him, how he now thought he showed enough to deserve a title shot
Yeah.
next. And I remember like I was listening to that interview and I was like, are you insane? Like you got no contest via eye poke and you're calling out the second most dominant champ in welterweight history.
After being away for 2-3 years too. So
Yeah, exactly. Like it's just that call out kind of came out of nowhere. I thought Bilal said the right thing. Like he's gonna vouch for himself. He said that fight was just getting started, and like Braden said, when you watch his past performances, for him that fight was just getting started. That's a situation he's been in before, and he likes to turn up the heat. So,
Oh, sorry.
sorry.
Bilal's also when I was trying to analyze this fight before it happened, Bilal's one of those guys who maybe he's not as technically superior as like a Leon Edwards, but he's very good tactfully, right? Like you'll see him go in there and he'll be doing things like utilizing lateral movement and working guys movement in a way that makes sense in there. He may not be like the sharpest and the quickest like striker, but he's gonna use strategies to try to make up for that, I think. And I
He
think
also puts on a lot of pressure to his opponents, which is something that I think in the later rounds for a guy that has ring rust.
hmm,
I mean, even though in the first round it didn't look like he had much ring rust, he looked quite good. But Bilal gets in your face. He can make it a dirty fight, and he puts a lot of pressure on, which is definitely something that Leon wouldn't want in that situation. In the first round, we saw he wasn't looking for in tight exchanges. He was keeping him at range. He was piecing him apart. He was landing great shots. So for Bilal, I really think that fight was getting. So I don't think it warrants a rematch, but I do think that fight was just getting started for him.
and that's exactly what I was going to say. Like as you get further into the fight and you're more worn down and more tired, it's going to be the tactics and that previous pressure that start to make the difference more than being able to maintain that technique as your body gets more tired, right? Um, yeah, so it's just difficult stylistically to try to guess how that fight was going to go, especially because it did end so early.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, but in general, I mean, good couple weeks of fights. Even though the Canadians didn't come out on top, I mean, regardless, it was still a good couple fights. So we'll wrap it up there. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and be sure to catch the next episode where we're gonna talk more about the knee incident, the eye poke, all the rules like that. So thanks everyone.